Today we are talking about Kickstart Your Fantasy Novel using the Fictionary Fantasy Outline. And we're going to talk about what's a fantasy, what specific scenes do you need in your fantasy, and where should those scenes be. And it's very cool because it's different from the other genres or just universal fiction. And so I'm kind of excited to see what everybody thinks about it. All right, so we're going to skip right over who I am because everybody here has met me, so we know. The only thing I'm going to say on this chart is, if you've read our books, could you please leave us a review? We seem to be stuck. We haven't changed reviews in a week. And I go in, I just really want, like, any review would be awesome. Okay, that's who and that's my guide duck, Juno, who's the cutest, so I like to put a picture up. Okay, story editing. So let's talk about outlining and editing in the context of fantasy. So we're still looking at a structural view of your story. And we're looking at story arc, characters, plot, and setting. Same thing as every other novel. We do this because if there's no structure, there's no story, and there's no book, no story, no book, and no book means no sales, and then we're all sad and we need a tissue. So part of fantasy is you have additional responsibilities. You can't just do the normal minimum structure that we've covered in all the other classes. You've got to create the supernatural. So that's either there's some magic in there or there's mythical creatures. You've got your vampires, your fairies, your werewolves, whatever. And you have to interweave those. So now you've got the structure of your main story and you've got the structure of your supernatural. And so we're going to show you the key scenes that you need for your fantasy. And we're going to show you some examples of how commercially successful novels have done this that make it, oh, Lucy put up a fairy, you're silly. Make it really, make the story strong. Okay, so you want to write a fantasy. So let's just talk about how we're going to do that. So if you're outlining, you want to set it up so that your structure is solid. If you're writing it, you want to pay attention to what you did in your outline and that you're writing to your solid structure. And if you're editing, you want to edit it to a solid structure. So I'd like to see where everybody is in their process. So 1 if you're outlining, 2 if you're writing, and 3 if you're already editing. In the chat is what I mean. 1, 3, outlining, 2, editing. I love the 0.5s. They're great. Thinking. Michelle's thinking. Instead of camping, she's thinking. Excellent. Okay, so we've got people all over. And the great news about this, revising complete novel, that's exciting, is, and Kit, none of the above, still researching. Well, Kit, I think you have a few books under your belt, so you're probably okay. I think it's awesome. So, fantasy is new to me. Yeah, so any of these, so what we're going to talk about applies to all 3. Okay, so fantasy genre. It's a story about an adventure. That's first up. There is an adventure. There needs to be magic or mythical creatures, one, the other, or both. But if there's neither, it's not a fantasy yet. It has specific story arc requirements. So you know how we talk about the inciting incident shakes up the protagonist's world. Okay, does something specific in a fantasy. We're going to talk about that for each of the 5 plot points. And we're going to talk about the supernatural story arc and what a supernatural story arc is. So when we talk about fantasy, we're talking about magic, mythical creatures. In sci-fi, we're talking about, so it's different from sci-fi, and we're not covering sci-fi today. We're focusing really on fantasy. So sci-fi is when technology is used that doesn't exist in our world. That's a different story. And the reader assumes that the natural laws apply. In a fantasy, there's something that doesn't exist in our world. And so our normal laws might not apply, like gravity might be the opposite or something. Horror is intended to frighten the reader. And it can have magical creatures and mythical creatures, but instead of being an adventure, I mean, all stories are a bit of an adventure, but it's about frightening the reader. And so we are really today just focused on fantasy to keep this tight. And what I want to do now is I want to go through, I'm going to skip over to the app. Lucy, just nod if you're seeing it. Okay. So what we did in the last, Linda, are you seeing it, or you look like you're, about to say no. Okay, hands up. Great. Okay. So in the last month or so, we introduced outlining. And, here's my favorite project test that everybody's seeing all over the place. And what we're going to do here is select the Fictionary Fantasy Outline. And what I advise for those of you who are already writing or editing, look through these scenes and see that you have them already in your fantasy novel. You're going to build your story based, or you're going to edit your story based on these, and anybody starting new can start new with these. Same as all of the other outlines, we've got the notes here that talk about what each scene is for. And as we go through them, we look at the inciting incident. So at the bottom here, we've got what's the main event and what it is for a fantasy novel. And typically, up to the inciting incident, we're in the ordinary world. Again, with fantasy, this can happen before the story. It can all happen in one scene. You might need many scenes here if your story is really complex with more than one subplot, etc. But at this point, the protagonist receives a challenge. The thing that's really important about the fantasy outline is here is the magic inciting incident. And so that means in the context of linking to the protagonist, this is where they get an inkling that magic exists, or they get a hint they can use it, or that a mythical creature appears. So it's their first, there's something different in my world. In many fantasies, or the protagonist will know at the beginning, these things exist. So for them, then it's something changed. Like, what's different about it? Could they use magic in a different way? Did they see a creature that didn't exist before? Whatever it is, there's something that shakes up their world. And this inciting incident can come before, it can come after, it can come in the inciting incident, it can come closer to the main plot point one. The critical thing is that it's there. It can be part of the reaction to the inciting incident, part of the resistance to the story goal. Doesn't actually matter. We pulled it out separately so you know that it exists, and it's going to kick off the supernatural element of your story. Then we have plot point one, and this is where they accept the adventure. And it's quite, they're either making a decision that, they're going to go forward with the adventure, but here is typically something significant has happened with the magic or the mythical creatures, and that's what they can't return back from. Once they know it, once they, once they see it, they can't unsee it. It's there, unless there's magic that, erases their mind, which also could happen. And so, okay, that's fine. You're allowed to do that. Same thing with the magic system plot point one. And I'm going to go through these and show you in an image. So, I just want to do a high level thing first of what's here. So here, they fully believe in the magic. So that may or may not happen in the main plot, adventure accepted, or they fully believe in the mythical creatures. So this is their same plot point one. And again, can be anywhere in this area. It can be part of these scenes. So please don't take this as this has to be exactly here in this order. This is just, remember, you need these scenes. Middle plot point, same thing. False victory or defeat. So same as our main story, we're changing direction. And then again, the magic middle plot point. So you can see where we're going with this, in that there is a parallel between your main plot story arc and your magic supernatural system story arc. Plot point two is dark forces, and we'll talk a little bit more what that means, but they also get the final piece of information they need to get to the climax. It's just now in the context of the supernatural and the magic. Same thing here. Quite often the magic plot point two, they've done something with the magic that hurts somebody, puts them at their lowest point. And quite often these are the same scene. By the time we get to plot point two, we're merging the story arcs together, and it's going to happen all in one scene. And the same with the climax. So you're going to have a magic system climax and a climax where they either achieve their challenge or don't achieve their challenge. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions.
I have a question.
Go for it. Yep, go for it.
So it looks like with fantasy, like the other person was saying, is it's kind of like double of everything. You have your regular story arc that you would have in regular fiction, but then you have the magical story arc as well, which mimics exactly the other plot points, but with magic. Is that correct?
Yeah, it yes, it can be, but it can also be completely combined together. And so you can do the two plot lines together. The key thing is to make sure that um, you have those scenes in there. So if it is one scene, it's doing the main plot, so they've accepted their adventure, but it's also doing plot point one for the magic or the mythical creatures. So then if it's one scene, you can have it all one scene, absolutely, but it can also be parallel and you know, in lots of books, up until plot point two, they're separate, and then at plot point two, they come together, and then the rest of the book goes forward. So there's quite a technique with it. External pressures are things outside of the protagonist's control that make it hard for them to reach their story goal. And so after the middle plot point, they're going to try, they're now on their proactive, and there's going to be other things that come in and hammer them and make it hard for them to do that. Okay, Jessica says, I have one main character who is on Earth and one who is in the afterlife. Would this work using this format? Yes, absolutely, because you're welcome with that. What this means is your supernatural is you've got two people, I'm assuming, who are communicating between now and or existing here on Earth and somewhere not on Earth, wherever the afterlife is. And so there you want to look at, well, when did they first get an inkling that somebody's in the afterlife and they're communicating? When did they accept that that's actually possible? And so you can go through this whole thing looking at the story, the supernatural story arc in the context of this. That's a great question. Okay, so we don't need this. So here, you're welcome. What we've done is we've filled in all of the scene purpose for you. And what we recommend is you go through this is when you, let me go back to the evaluate page. When you've got your purpose of scene here, you can either update it. So to update it, you can just type whatever you want in the text and click add, or you can update your scene name to be specific to your book. And so when we look at scene names, what you're also seeing in the outline is you're seeing, you know, you can, don't worry about the outline instructions. There's one line of text there. It won't skew your story arc or muck up any of the results. You can leave it or not, or you can just delete the scene. Then you can see here all of the scenes you have, and every time you add a scene and name it, it's going to show up here. And so you can see where your story arc scenes are in the context of your whole story. And you can see, and I like to capitalize things like this so I know where they are. So even if, for example, the magic system, and you could just put PP2 to make it short, or MS PP2, but something you can see, and then put the scene name behind it. Because when you're looking at this, you can then see your story together with your story arc scenes and your magic system scenes, and see how you can actually see how you're weaving them together. Okay, so that's how the app is going to help you do this. So now let's take a look. Let's go back here. Okay, so before I go to that, having heard all that, type a yes in the chat if you feel like your book right now is going to meet these requirements, or no, it's not quite a fantasy yet. Definitely. Excellent. I think so. Okay, Jessica, is there something you're unsure about that makes you say, I think so?
Hey, sorry, I wasn't sure if I could take myself off mute or not. So and thank you so much for answering my other question. It's difficult because the person on Earth is actually never going to talk to the person in the afterlife.
Okay.
The afterlife guy, it is a romance. They ultimately will be together, but the afterlife guy is actually her dream maker. He makes dreams for her. That's one of his jobs in the afterlife. So
nice. Okay, so who's the protagonist in this?
the guy who is in the afterlife.
Okay, so then it's his supernatural story arc, because he'll be the one who, when does he first communicate with her? Then plot point when When does he accept that he's going to move forward with the romance? So you can take this and also look at the romance outline that's in Fictionary and look at the romance story arc scenes, because from his perspective, the inciting incident could be when he first connects with her in a dream or creates a dream for her. Whatever he does that would be like a meet cute in real life, even though she's not fully aware of it because it's in her dreams, you could map the two together. And so you're going to have the supernatural aspect with the romantic aspect. And so if you just look at the two scenes, like each of the individual story arc scenes, one for romance, one for supernatural, you can figure out how they're going to fit and play together. It sounds like a great story.
Oh, thank you. Again, I went to the romance one too, so I appreciate all your help.
Okay, fantastic. That's great. All right, good. So I think that anybody else, okay, so we're all good there. All right, so let's move forward. Okay, so fantasy, it's magic and mythical creatures. That's it. So type a yes in the chat if you've read these books or any of these books. Lots. Okay, good. Okay, nice. So I chose these books because they're all commercially successful. They're all fantasy. Unbroken is a military fantasy. Fourth Wing is straight up fantasy with a really strong romance subplot, but not a romantasy. And then Game of Thrones is dark fantasy. And what they have, so the Unbroken is by C.L. Clarke. So it's the magic in the book is healing magic. So you can heal somebody. And it's very soft between, it's really, it's a military fantasy with this is the magic, but it's not huge like in Fourth Wing. It's really strong magic. Magic is everywhere. Magic is in every scenes. And there's dragons and there's griffins and there's magic. Like it's really heavy. And then the Game of Thrones magic is spattered throughout. So it's got, the dragon magic in it. It's got the red woman who can bring people back to life. And sometimes the magic story arc is across multiple books, not just the first book. And so they're all very different in how they treat fantasy. And here, of course, is the beauty of fantasy. Okay, Katie, cozy fantasy. Lucy, did you see that? Lucy loves that term. She talks about cozy fantasy as her favorite type of fantasy. And I'm like, what? Cozy is romances. And she's like, oh no. And look, Katie just proved me wrong. And Lucy, right? Yes, you can have a cozy fantasy. It's on the other end of the scale of the dark fantasy. These books are structurally sound, like really, really strong. If you read them and you map them, Lucy and I've mapped them all in Fictionary, and they're really strong structurally. And so they're great examples to look at to see how each of these authors in a very different way is handling fantasy. So, and again, with fantasy, genres are blurred. So, it can be like fantasy sci-fi, fantasy romance, fantasy horror. So when you think of genres, think of what you're trying to write. The reader's going to interpret the book from their perspective of what they want to bring into it. So, for example, if I love romance, Fourth Wing is the book for me, right? Just because there's so much romance in that. And I might not see it more as a fantasy than a romance. Or The Unbroken, I might pull out the romance more in there too. So it's what the reader brings. But what we're talking about for you is what you're writing, and stay true to what you're writing. And the reader is going to bring their own experience, and you can't control that. And they're going to see your book as what they see your book. All right. So whether you're editing, outlining, story blurb, story structure comes first in both cases. This is what we're doing to set you up to be fundamentally strong. And it'll give you a really great starting point. So you know what I'm going to say here. Writing skeleton blurbs. And you notice there's like an S here, blurbs. So we need more than one blurb for a fantasy novel. Blurbs are a tool just for you, the writer. Nobody else needs to see this. It's different from your book description. It's for you to stay focused on your book. So it's the shortest version of who's the protagonist, what's their goal, what's at stake, and it's to keep you focused. And, and to ask yourself, does every scene belong in my novel? So you're going to ask for that purpose that we put up. When you add scenes to the outline, you add new ones. Why is it in your story, and how does it relate to your skeleton blurb? And that will ensure a page turner, because every book has a purpose related to your main story. So we're going to have skeleton blurbs for the main story, and then you have to write a skeleton blurb for the supernatural story too. I know everybody likes homework, but that is the homework. And so for here, part of the thing is when we're looking at books is figure out who the protagonist is. And so in The Unbroken, it's either Terrain or Luca. In Fourth Wing, Violet or Xaden. In Game of Thrones, Will, Bran, Catelyn, Daenerys, Jon, Ned, Sansa, Tyrion, Will. Oh, I put Will there twice. Look, I must really like Will. He's only in the very first scene. He's got one scene. He doesn't deserve to be there, but he has a very strong purpose in this book. And so the skeleton blurb is going to help you really see who your protagonist is. It's not as difficult to see your protagonist in a fantasy as it is in a romance. That's where it gets really tricky and people really struggle between who the protagonist actually is. So if we look at these, The Unbroken has 2 points of view, Terrain and Luca, through the whole book. Fourth Wing did something interesting. So it's single point of view. It's Violet the whole way through. And then at the end, Xaden gets 2 scenes in both book 1 and book 2. We don't know book 3 because it's not published yet. So Game of Thrones has 9 points of view. So, and he's got amazing point of view control. If you want to see how to do point of view control, this is it. And thank you, Michelle, for your comment. So with Game of Thrones, it's a tricky one because it starts with the inciting incident, and I'm going to show you when I show you the skeleton blurb how that works. All right, so we've got in fantasy single protagonist. That's my one sword. So different goals, different stakes, different journey for your characters. Then you know one of them is the protagonist. Combined means 2 characters have the same goals, same stakes, same journey. And I think the one we're going to bring up in the fantasy course is Zodiac. Is it the Zodiac one? Zodiac Academy, Lucy? Yeah, Zodiac Academy is written from Tori and Darcy's point of view, and they're a combined protagonist. So great example for a combined protagonist. And then a group protagonist, which is Game of Thrones. It's same goals. So that group has the same goals, different stakes, and a different journey, but they're on the same mission. So when we look at, we'll start with Fourth Wing because it's really good. So when we write Violet's skeleton blurb, she must use her intelligence to survive the Rider's Quadrant, otherwise she will die. So that's her main plot line. If we take out the magic and the mythical creatures, that is her main plot. This is her goal through the story. She's the point of view for all scenes except the end. And so she is the protagonist of this story. There's no question. You read it all the way through. It's hers. The reader's not thinking it's anyone else. The supernatural plot point, skeleton blurb, is Violet must use dragon magic. Otherwise, she will not survive her first year as a cadet. So this is the tool she's going to use to achieve her main skeleton blurb. So she's the single protagonist for this as well. And the two just go hand in hand. If we look at The Unbroken, we've got Terrain, who must stop a rebellion. Otherwise, she will never gain her freedom. Her love interest is Luca, the princess. And she must prove her worth as a leader. Otherwise, she won't become queen. So she's trying to take down her uncle, I think it is in that book. So if we look at, let's just go over to Unbroken for a second. So Unbroken, and I'm just going to go to the point of view insight. And here we see, I haven't done 2 of the scenes, that's okay. 58% of the scenes are from Terrain's point of view and only 40 from Luca. And they have different skeleton blurbs, so it's only going to be one of them who's a protagonist. So terrain is the single protagonist here. Okay. So they both have point of view scenes, which I just showed, and they have different goals. So terrain's a single protagonist for here. So if you've already written your fantasy, you're looking through it to see to make sure that you've chosen the right protagonist and that your point of view strategy is following it. If you're at the outlining stage, you may or may not know this yet, and you can, if you know it, great, outline it out. If you don't, then you put your structure in place and figure it out as you're writing it. Depends on how much of a pantser plotter you are. Everybody's on a different range in that spectrum. Then we have a Game of Thrones, and the skeleton blurb for this is: the humans must defeat the White Walkers, otherwise humans cease to exist. That's it. That's why this is a combined protagonist, because it's the humans against the White Walkers. 9 points of view in the first novel. All are humans, so we don't see anything from the White Walkers' point of view. And the humans are a group protagonist. And what he did in this book that's really interesting is the first scene in the book is a scene where the humans meet the White Walkers, and the White Walkers kill all but one. And that one guy, Will, gets away. And then he meets Ned Stark and the rest of the entourage. It doesn't end well for him, but it's the thing that shakes up the main goal of the humans must defeat the White Walkers. The subplot in there, it's a fight for the kingdoms. And unless they can come together as a group at the end and battle the White Walkers, they're going to lose. And so he's framed the entire series with one scene of White Walkers and humans where most of the humans lose. And then he goes right to the humans, and off goes the story. And each of these characters, if you remember back with the combined protagonists, they're on a different journey. So their goal is to beat the White Walkers, but they're all on a different journey, and the stakes are different. So some could lose the kingdom, some lose their head, some lose their family, some don't lose anything. They're the big winners, but they're each, the stakes are different for each characters, but they're combined because their main goal is to defeat the White Walkers. So it's a really fascinating book to study. Even if it's not you don't want the dark fantasy, it's a really fascinating book to study. So then, of course, you've got to identify the story arc scenes. And you know this because, I'm going to say for both the main plot and the supernatural. So they're the 5 key scenes. It's the inciting incident, plot point 1, middle plot point 2, and the climax of the story. And here you're doing this to determine if you have a story and to evaluate the pacing. And if one of these scenes is missing, there is no story. And that's a big topic, but you need these to make sure there's a story. Michelle is nodding because she's heard me talk about that so many times. So here we are in a fantasy story arc. So let's talk about the inciting incident. So they all happen in the same, I just took out all the percentages to make it clear, but the inciting incident is the challenge. And I'm going to go through Fourth Wing quite deeply on this to show you what it is. The plot point 1 is the adventure is accepted. Middle is the false victory or defeat. Plot point 2 is dark forces. So something really bad is happening against evil society, evil community, big evil happens here. And then either they achieve the goal or not, meaning they accept this adventure. Did they succeed or not? Typically in a fantasy, if you're writing a series, this now becomes they succeed in this goal, but not the series goal. So there's going to be a difference between having a single book goal and a fantasy series goal, which is the whole series course. So if we look at Fourth Wing, so I'm going to go through there's spoilers coming. I'm going to tell you the ending. So if you haven't read the book, you have to turn your volume off when I get to climax. So I'm going to tell you the whole story. Okay, everybody got that? There's spoilers here. I don't want anyone sad later when I've told you the ending to this very fantastic book. So here we've got the inciting incident. And I put 0% here, but it happens before the book starts. And this is when Violet's mother orders her to go to the Riders Quadrant. She's been a scribe her whole life. She's now, I think, 20. And she's got now 6 months before the book starts to prepare herself as a dragon rider warrior, as opposed to library woman. So you know, big difference in her life. So this is her shakeup before the book starts. And here she's not, you know, she's it's done kind of in backstory, like you know it from the book description, and you also know it from her thought process as she's going through the really active opening scene, but you totally get the gist of what she's struggling with. Then we go to plot point 1, and this is where Violet bonds with a dragon. And the reason this is plot point 1 in this story is once bonded with a dragon, you cannot unbond. You can't go backward. There's no way for her to do anything but this. She, up until this point in the story, she could run away, she could hide, she could beg her mother, she could do many things to get out of this. But once she's bonded, that is it. So she now has to move forward with her story goal. And you'll notice here, this is 35% into the story. You know, we usually say 20 to 30%, but there's such a strong supernatural plot and romance plot. It fills the book with tension, and it gives you more room to be more liberal with where you place your story arc scenes. So again, this is stressing story arc is guidance. It's not, it has to be here because it depends on your book. If this book had no subplots and no romance, so it was just this straight up adventure, this wouldn't work. There wouldn't be enough in the story for the main plot point 1 to happen this late. Oh, look, I put in there, cannot return to the bonded to Taryn. Huh, there we go. I wrote stuff on here. Middle plot point. So Taryn channels power to Violet. So here, her direction is now changed. So once she gets bonded, this is the next challenge. If she can't get his power, she can't succeed. So what this has done is it's made her magic stronger. It's you know, it was difficult for her. It's very overwhelming, this dragon power that comes into her. And so here now, she's starting to believe, up until this point, she's really just trying to survive the day. Like, oh, I hope I'm not dead tonight is kind of her goal. I will not die today. She says it a lot. Middle plot point, she starts thinking she might actually live. It could happen that maybe, and this is where that happens. Plot point 70, plot point 2, it's at 70%. And here she kills another human for the very first time. And this is two things for her. One, she's at her lowest of her low because she's killed somebody. And that's not who she wants to be. She wanted to be a scribe. She didn't want to be a warrior. And so this is devastating for her. The other thing is she gets the information she needs. When she kills Jack, she actually shoots lightning at a mountain, takes the mountain down. She has no control over it. This is her problem, but she knows now, she's got the knowledge in her head. So when she's in the climax scene, she knows that she can use lightning. And so in the climax scene, it gives her the knowledge at that point that she's going to be able to do it. So she's gained her power to win at the end. And then in the final battle, she controls her magic enough that she wins. There's still issues, but she's got it. And so you can see here, final battle, 87%. So it's nicely placed. So the two things she's doing here, there's a huge length of time between the inciting incident and plot point 1, which is quite unique for a book. And she's obviously done it beautifully. So these are her main plot points. So then if we go to the supernatural, this is where it gets a little interesting. So her first event in the supernatural, so Violet's magic is she has to bond and control magic through this dragon. So the first time she meets Taryn, it's kind of like they're meet cute, and he speaks to Violet telepathically. And so that's her first real interaction with the magic with a dragon. Even though she's grown up magic all around her, she knows Rider's Bond, she knows all of this is there, but this is her first time, and this happens just before plot point 1. At plot point 1, she not only bonds with one dragon, she bonds with 2. First time that's happened in the history of wherever they live, which I can't remember at the time, but not relevant. So she has 2 dragons, which makes her very unique. And between plot point 1 and the middle, her plot point 1 with magic is she channels her second dragon, Andarna's power. And she does this to save her life. So it comes from a very emotional place. And so she now knows on the supernatural, she has something there. In the middle plot point, she unknowingly channels lightning. She doesn't actually know she's done it, but it's there, and her supernatural is now allowing her to move forward. Happens at the same time as the middle plot point for the main plot. In plot point 2, she's using this magic to kill, same as plot point 2 for the main story. And in plot point climax, she uses that magic. So you can see in this book, the supernatural and the main plot story, they merge at the middle plot point. Some books merge at plot point 2, or later. So your book, you're going to decide what you want to do. Okay. So the Unbroken, a little bit different story arc. So in the inciting incident, Terrain, who's a warrior, saves the princess's life. So Princess Luca. And that's their meet cute. But it's also what is starting Terrain on her new adventure. And then lots of bad things happen, and she gets arrested, and she's going to get executed. So Luca comes in with an offer for her to work for her. So she leaves the military, she joins the royal life. So she's accepted this plot point of, okay, I'm going to have this whole new life, I'm moving forward. And at this point, she's also experienced the healing magic on herself. So she knows there's magic. Close to halfway through, she reveals to Luca that there is healing magic. And this is a difficult point because Luca has very different motives from Terrain and has taken the story and it's pushing Terrain now. She's going to have to make some choices on who she's going to be and how she's going to live. And then plot point 2, the priestess wife is taken, and Terrain is almost killed, and there's magic used to bring her back to life. And then at the end, she needs that healing magic, and they attack a compound and she wins. And then her and Luca split after book 1, and then of course there's the whole next story behind it. And you can see here, she's a little closer to what we traditionally say the story arc scene should be. But it's all the same things that happen in the main storyline for a fantasy novel. Okay, so that's not where I wanted to go. I wanted to go. Oh, I feel like I'm missing something here, and I don't know what it is. Well, we'll keep going. Okay, so Lisa says, do normal world scenes need to connect to fantasy skeleton blurb and vice versa or not? Lisa, can you tell me what you mean by normal world scene? Doesn't it feel quiet in here right now? Did Lisa go? Is she still there? Is she typing? Okay. I'm just not quite sure what the question is, Lucy. Oh, the main goal.
I think it might be ordinary world scenes. So before the inciting incident, perhaps, is maybe what Lisa's looking for, and the main goal in the skeleton fantasy.
Yes. Okay. So that's a very interesting point. And what you'll see in lots of fantasy novels is the main goal will be, so if we look at Fair and Tamlin in
Court of Thorns and Roses.
Court of Thorns and Roses. It's a good example. So her goal before the inciting incident, so in her ordinary world, is to feed her family because she wants to care for those she loves. When she goes past plot point 1 and she moves to the fairy world, her goal is to help the fairies, otherwise she loses those she loves. So it's a common, so in this case, the author has linked it by stakes. So the stakes are the same. So her goal is a little bit different, and one is to feed her family, and then in the rest of the book it's to fight evil, basically, of the evil witch who's trying to kill all the fairies that she loves. And so you link it in a way that their adventure story goal doesn't start. So your main goal that's in your skeleton blurb doesn't start until the inciting incident, or it could even be as late as plot point 1, depending on how you're doing your book. Before that, the goal relates in some way, and it's typically whatever the main goal is, there's an ordinary world version of that goal. In Lucy, can you think of another example that might be more clear of?
So in the ordinary world of Twilight, she's sacrificing her life so that her mother can have a glorious life with her new husband. And in later on, for anyone who doesn't want to know, they close the noise off. But she does the same thing. She sacrifices for her mother again because she thinks she's protecting her. And so it's a micro goal before the main goal gets introduced that mimics that goal that the whole story is about. And so you need to find some synergy between them.
Yep. Hopefully that helped with that. It's a very complicated topic. Okay, so that is all I wanted to cover today. I just want to talk about, okay, Secrets to Writing a Fantasy will come out kind of around when we're doing the course, and the Forge Your Fantasy starts August 6th. For anyone who wants to take a fantasy course, Lucy is very happy. These are all the other ones. If you're in Fictionary Live and have Storyteller Premium, you can attend any of these courses coming up. But this is the new one. And pre-reading, so this was a suggestion from the fantasy course. We're going to do a deep dive into these 4 books. And we're doing it because we've got 2 points of view, single point of view, combined protagonist, group protagonist. And so we chose these specifically. They're all commercially successful. So if you feel like reading books ahead of time, you've got almost 2 months to read these books, all excellent books. And then we're going to do an extra class ahead of time in Fictionary Live, and we're going to look at what genres these books are and why they're in those genres, and the cross-genre aspect, all from like going from straight up romance to straight up dark fantasy, so that we can have a genre discussion around it. So when you start the fantasy course, you're very clear on what your genre is, and I think that will make it a little easier for people when they're starting.